The last several weeks, we've been doing a series on the kings of Judah, looking through the Bible and learning about the histories of the kings of Israel and Judah, covering the years roughly from 1050 BC to 587 BC, when the kingdom is finally destroyed. And we know about these histories from the books of the Old Testament, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And they, in great detail for the first few kings, and very quickly, with fairly cursory detail for the many later kings, tell this long story of the kingdom of Judah, and especially about these kings that led the kingdom. Now, these histories of the Bible constitute a fairly large component of the Old Testament. Roughly a quarter of the Old Testament is these histories. But also, in addition to these historical books, which were, of course, composed after the fact, we also have the books of the prophets. Most of the prophets lived and prophesied during the times of this kingdom, mostly to warn the people, to remind them of their covenant with God, to encourage them to come back to God and to amend their ways. And these prophets are kind of like eyewitness accounts that dot these histories, that provide some on-the-ground observation and comment on what's actually going in real time at the personal level. And many of them are very strident, they're graphic, they're even chilling. Some of the descriptions and the warnings and the exhortations that they give. And while the histories can be somewhat distant in their recounting and somewhat objective, we get a very personal, very visceral recounting from the words of these prophets. However, in addition to these histories and these prophets that tell the story of the kingdom of Judah, we also have a little book, a tiny one called Lamentations. And it's often glossed over. It's kind of sandwiched between the big prophetic books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. It's right there between Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And while these other major tomes of prophetic work are very well studied and very well preached on in many churches, this little book of Lamentations is only 5 chapters and very infrequently shows up in churches or in commentary or preaching. But this book of Lamentations is notable. It's just a small collection of 5 dirges or lamentations, and they are written traditionally by Jeremiah the prophet soon after the downfall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the kingdom and the bringing of the people into exile, their captivity. And this Lamentations, like the works of the prophets that occurred during the times of the kings, this Lamentations follows immediately after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the dashing of the hopes of the people, after this terribly traumatic event and the ending of all the history of the peoples up to this point. And it, like the prophetic works, gives us a very vivid eyewitness account of what's actually happening in real time to real people. These Lamentations, again, traditionally by Jeremiah, are painfully heartfelt. Their descriptions are heart-wrenching, are explicit to the point of being disturbing, and they convey a sense in the way that the histories can't of the real effect and impact of the loss of this kingdom on the peoples who actually inhabited and lived through this time of destruction. As a couple examples from the book of Lamentations. My eyes are spent with weeping. My soul is in tumult. My heart is poured out in grief because of the destruction of the daughter of my people. Because infants and babes faint in the streets of the city. They cry to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" as they faint like wounded men in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out on their mother's bosom. And he writes of his own experience, "He has made my teeth grind on gravel, and has made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, gone is my glory, and my expectation from the Lord." Now, all of us, everyone, has experienced hardship and loss, distress and sadness. Some have experienced great tragedy in life. But while all of us can relate to some degree, it's at the same time difficult to fully comprehend what these people are actually going through at this time of the destruction of Jerusalem. For the city had been sieged for about 2 years, and during the latter parts of the siege, food ran out, famine and pestilence set in, and many die of hunger. And when the Babylonians finally break through the wall, many additionally are put down by the sword. But it doesn't end there. For we can all empathize with loss. But even in the greatest of our losses, many things still continue. Our culture, our country, our community, our families, many things still continue on in life. But for the people of Judah at this time, when their country was utterly destroyed, their whole culture was wiped out. The people were drawn away into captivity. Their city was demolished. Their worship of God in the temple itself was burned, and all the implements and the tools that they used for worship were either taken away or destroyed. And the city itself, the houses, the palaces were burned, the walls were torn down. And everything that they knew and lived for was suddenly destroyed and gone. Not only did they themselves suffer extraordinarily, physically, personally, relationally, but their whole way of life was wiped out in this terrible series of events. And compounded with this is the acknowledgement, as described in Jeremiah and repeated severally through the book of Lamentations, is an awareness of their guilt that has brought this upon them. A realization that it was their transgressions, it was their neglect of God and their wrongdoing that has brought this terrible destruction, this complete annihilation about. And this book of Lamentations, which is so often glossed over or only understood in a cursory way, has great value for us in expressing this grief of these people who have gone through this traumatic event. But it also gives us clear insight, as clear as possibly can, of this wholly destructive experience that the people of God went through on account of their faithlessness. And it helps us to see the consequences of persistent neglect of God and of a culture-wide and generationally continuing wrongdoing that has set in among a nation and a people, and is a good warning for us ourselves today and at every time. But also, and very importantly, perhaps most importantly, of value in this book of Lamentations is right in the heart of this 5-chapter book, in the middle of chapter 3, amidst all these descriptions of destruction and suffering and lament on both sides. Right in the middle is a brief 12-verse portion that is a shout of hope, that among this setting of blackness and soot and destruction and decay and anguish, there rises up in the middle of it this bright gleaming exclamation that even amidst this all, there is in God hope. And this section is our reading from the Old Testament today. Please join along in hearing with me from this book of Lamentations. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone in silence when he has laid it on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust. There may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the smiter, and be filled with insults. For the Lord will not cast off forever. But though he cause grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve the sons of men. This is the heart of the book of Lamentations. This is its soul. And while we have learned through this series on the kings of Judah, this long and rich history of the people of God, and we have learned from them, from their failures and their transgressions, their fallings, and their occasional returnings to God, we learn from observing their story how God likewise wants us to live in faithfulness and to trust with him. How that even in times of failure and transgression, we too can, like them, be restored and can start again anew. And we also gain here in this aftermath, in this looking back in this time of destruction over what has happened to this point in the life of the kingdom and of the people that it contained, we see profound dismay, disorientation, confusion, and deep lament, and yet springing up like an eternal spring is this hope, this bright hope that even in the most dismal and bleak of times, yet God is, and God's steadfast love endures forever, that his mercies can still be trusted, and though we may be afflicted, just as the people of the kingdom were, it is often meant to last but a season. It is often meant for our good, and it comes about in the context of God's overwhelming love and grace for us. These histories of the Bible, these exciting adventures, these twists and turns, these many rich stories of the Old Testament alongside the stern, grave, prophetic rebukes contained in the prophets. This whole swoop spans several hundred pages in the Bible, and there are many lessons to glean from them. They are very happily contained in the Scriptures for good purpose, but they all come to a landing point, which is here in the book of Lamentations, here in the aftermath of their story, and springing up in the middle and the heart of this lament, this reflection after all has transpired, is the central message that comes into fullness in the New Testament several centuries after, which is that of everlasting hope, of rock-solid endurance of the grace of God, and of the overwhelming and thoroughgoing and everlasting love of God for us today. And may we too, as people of God today, in the most bleakest of times, in the most difficult of circumstances, when things seem like all has truly come to a very tragic and horrific end, may we too come to that same landing point, despite the blackness that surrounds us, and be reminded, like the people of God of many years ago, be reminded that God is good, that God is there, and that God has a plan that will continue to unfold, even though we may not see it in our present darkness. So I hope this series of the Kings of Judah is of some strength to your spiritual life, and is also of enrichment to your understanding of the scriptures as a whole. So thanks again for joining today, and may God bless you today.